Hi, it's me again. I'm back. So today what I want to talk about is a topic that I've thought about for a really long time, and through college and other discussions and also seeing forums on social media, I realized that this was a very big topic. So the topic is stay in a child's place and how parents can be emotionally stunted and also very abusive. Now, this topic is pretty problematic because I know many people, they will defend certain parental choices to the death of them, and I'm not here to argue about what someone's parenting style is. I'm just saying in general the damages and how bad those things can be for your child. So for the aspect of staying in a child's place, this is something that was repeated to me a lot as a kid. Basically, I would question something, or kids are naturally quizzical. I would question something and be like, this isn't fair, like why do I have to do this and no one else has to do this, and it would be considered being grown or talking back or disrespect. So it put that nugget in my mind as I grew older that I'm not able to question authority at all. So I had a lot of issues with authority growing up, like, oh, this person's ordered me and they told me to do something, I have to do it, I don't have the right to say no. So I feel like this type of parenting, it takes away your child's agency and they're not able to speak up for themselves or get out of bad situations that trusted figures are supposed to be. Now, the emotional stuntedness that comes from a parent is because this is something that most of us have heard from our parents. I'm not one of your little friends. When you try to be any type of emotionally available or even hold a conversation with an adult like your parent or parents, and to be told, oh, I'm not one of your friends, it teaches you, okay, so I'm not allowed to tell you anything. But then in the next breath of like, oh, tell me about your day. So it's like, do I tell you? I thought you said you weren't my friends, so I'm not allowed to talk to you in a casual way. So it creates like this weird dichotomy where you're performing around your parental figure. Like, I didn't know that this was the case, but as I got older, I realized that I was doing this. The person that I was while I was at home was not the person that I was while I was at school. I was more myself while I was at school because I wasn't around my family. Like, I would literally go home, turn on my music, and like shut myself in. And even with that, a problem would still arise. Like, oh, you're being disrespectful, you didn't greet me, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. So it's like the goalposts will continue to shift because sometimes your parental figures, they want to adultify and live vicariously through you. That's pretty much what my relationship with my parent was like. I didn't realize that that was going on until I went to college and I had a certain amount of space between us to realize like, oh, I've been pushed into certain beliefs because this is what you believe, and I was never allowed to question that. So for many people, they'll go through their life not really realizing that that's what's going on. They'll be coerced or heavily suggested into a certain life path or certain beliefs because, the first socialization that you experience is through your family. In my opinion, a lot of parents also suffer from codependency. Now, a lot of people will have a baby to have a baby. They're like, oh, I want to have a baby, my baby will be so cute. But they're not really ready for the part where the baby grows into a toddler and into a child and into a teen and then an adult who is going to have their own formed opinions and beliefs. And just like I talked about before, how other people can drag you down and what like growth that you want to have, your family can do the same thing for you. Now, it's no secret that I've gone no contact with family, even if there have been attempts on the other end to rekindle things. After thinking about it for more than 5 seconds, I realized it just wasn't going to be sustainable. Also, main reason why I chose to move abroad. Okay. So, a lot of times too, there was a lot of segregation in my family, like between segregation is a strong word, but there was a lot of separation in my family between adults and children. So there was always the different groupings, like, oh, you can't sit here, this is the adults table, or you have to sit there because that's the kids table, and kids don't speak unless spoken to, and da-da-da-da. It was like a lot of orders and hierarchies, and it was exhausting as a kid. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't sit at the couch, I have to sit on the floor. Oh, I can't ask you a question, I gotta go be with the kids. And as I got older, eventually I was old enough to sit at the adults table, and I realized that the adults table was just gossiping and drama, and I'm like, this is what was being kept out. Like, they do this at the kids' table, so I want to know what's the difference. So that was very disappointing to get to that age and realize that that's all everything was. I was like, oh, I expected so much more of you guys, but I guess I was wrong. Seeing things through rose-colored glass. And being told to stay in a child's place, like, I feel like that's so damaging to a child because it just teaches them so many negative things. Like I said earlier, oh, I'm not allowed to ask questions. I'm not allowed to look people in the eye. I'm not allowed to basically be a functional person. I have to dim my light or dismiss myself in order to be the ideal version of what type of child you wanted. And it's just not healthy because no one asked to be born and to be put through all these trials and tribulations like, oh, you're not enough. I feel like it's going to ruin your kids' self-esteem, their self-worthiness, their self-love, their value. And that's something that I had to unpack over years and unlearn. And that's so exhausting and not fair for someone to have to go through. So I'm very big on, like, don't have kids if you're not there emotionally or mentally, because I was on the worst end of that with, like, a parent who clearly didn't want their kids, like being told, oh, I love you but I don't like you, oh, you're my kid so I have to take care of you, oh, you should be grateful because compared to other people, look at how much I've done for you. It makes the relationship be so transactional, like, oh, I have to cross all my T's and dot all my I's in order to be loved by you or appreciated by you. And that's just not fair for a kid to go through. It's just so emotionally taxing and draining, and it also makes a kid mature much faster than they're supposed to, which is also a bad thing because then it will put you in situations that you don't need to be in. So with my parental figure, the codependency was apparent very early. Now, I was never the favorite child. I think that's super obvious. My mother had a much more preferred relationship with my sister. And I knew that from a young age because my sister would never get in trouble as much as I did. Like, I was like the model child. Like, I got into fights and stuff. I was naughty in that regard, but it's because, my parent was my first bully. So I would go to school and like try and do to others what was done to me, and that didn't work out because I was naturally a smart kid, very gifted. I was in the gifted program, so I got given a lot of chances to correct myself and do better and improve, and that was super, super helpful to me. A lot of other people didn't take those and they ended up in a completely different life path. Now for me, as I was at school and I realized my own personality and my own thoughts, I started to like nurse this guilt like inside of me, where I was like, oh my gosh, I'm such a fake person. Like, when I'm at home with my family, I don't act this way, but like my friends, I had like a very heavily dependent relationship with my friends. Like, they were like basically my family. I would treat them like my family. And even my sister noticed this, where she's like, oh, I see how you act with your friends, you're not the same with me. And I'm just like, I tried to rectify that relationship. Like, I lived with her for less than a month and I was like, oh my gosh, you're just like my mom, this isn't gonna work for me. And I ended up going no contact with that relationship as well. Now there's just some relationships that cannot be fixed. Like, for me and them, it was them talking down on me or making fun of abuses or traumas that I've experienced, and that being like, oh, you deserved it because of what you are, who you are. And being told that constantly by people who you're supposed to love and care about, it will freeze over pretty much anything. I was like, okay, this isn't gonna work. I don't wanna be in this situation anymore. So as I got older and I kept going back, that guilt, it just lessened and lessened. It was basically because when people treat you poorly, or they're very toxic and abusive, it's easier to say, okay, well, I'm not in the wrong in this situation because I've tried everything I can. Like, I've gone to therapy, I've been in therapy the majority of my life, but you've not gone to therapy, or you're not trying to go to therapy. So I try and have these very high EQ conversations where it's like, okay, this is what's hurting me, how can we fix this? And it's like, why are you hurt by this? It's not that deep. It's like, oh, okay, so no matter what I say or how I try and fix things, it's just not gonna work. So the codependency just keeps getting worse and worse. Before I reached that point in my life, I was like, oh my gosh, what can I do? I can't do this, I can't go here. I need to call and ask first. Like, any idea or subject that came up, I'd been like groomed into this mindset where it's like, you aren't allowed to think for yourself. Like, if you have any concerns or questions, you need to talk to your mom first. So after a while, I'm like, why am I calling her for stuff like this? Like, I already know the answer and I know she's gonna make fun of me and see, this is why you need me, this is why da-da-da-da. The codependency, I realized the depth of it once I entered college. So in high school, I was very much, like I said earlier, persuaded or dependent on the type of approval that my mother could give me. So everything I wanted to do or any question that I had, I would always be the first one to call her. And then, the first start of the call is going to be putting me down as to why I couldn't figure it out on my own and why I needed to call her. But the thing was, like, I already knew the answer. I knew what I was supposed to do, but you've conditioned me for the majority of my life to always call you no matter what. And even if I was at home and she was out, she would call me. Just so that, because, you know, she didn't have any friends, just so that she could have somebody to talk to. And she would talk to me like I was one of her little friends. I'd be so confused. I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, okay, so she must be out in public and she wants to look like she's talking to her friend because she must be in like some type of situation. So now I have to behave in a way that I'm normally told I'm not allowed to. So, you know, I'm cutting it up, joking and stuff like this. And I'm like, this isn't normal. Like, just an hour ago, like, or so before you left, you were saying how I'm not allowed to talk to you like this. You don't care about my business or whatever. And if I ever, like, once I got older, so about like 16, 17, if I would start to question her, like, it wasn't, oh, you're staying in a child place, da-da-da, I guess she realized I was getting older, it would just immediately start crying. And it was like emotional blackmail. Like, oh, your dad is dead, it's just me by myself, da-da-da-da, you should be more grateful to me. And I'm like, all I did was ask a question. So I'm like, okay, I'm sorry, never mind this, never mind that. So it got worse. And there was also many, many other instances that were also equally exhausting, where if I didn't ask a question, or if I did ask a question, instead of her crying, she would go into a yelling fit or start throwing things at me or trying to hit me. And, you know, physical abuse. I don't understand why people vouch for that in parenting. I feel like it's not parenting at all, it's just abuse. So I experienced a lot of that growing up, and I was so exhausted because I tried to have this conversation with her at one point. This is before college. And first she cried, and then I went away. And she came to me later and was like, oh, the thing that happened, I'll just say it. I told her we didn't have anything in common, because anything that I was interested in, she would just shut me down. Like, you can look behind me, like anime, manga, reading, fantasy, all that stuff in general is what I was interested in, because I needed escapism, because the life at home was just so bad and abusive that I was like, okay, I need something else to think about, something else to fill my mind. Now that I think about it, I genuinely feel that it's because, like what I said earlier, when parents are afraid of their child becoming their own person or growing up into something different, and she was just fearful of that change. And that is probably what put her in such a state. And that's not to excuse it, but I'm realizing, like going through the editing, that's probably what was going through her mind. No justification, but it makes sense in that regard. And she got so triggered by that. She was like, oh, we played this game together. I'm like, but I don't like this game. This is the game that you like, and I play this game to make you happy. But if I suggest a game or something that I want to play, you'll make fun of it. Like, it was just exhausting. Like, no matter what I do, like, if it's not what you like, then we can't do it together. So I realized, I'm like, we don't really have much of a relationship, because you honestly don't really know me. And she went away, she cried for a little bit, and then came back and then said, oh, I don't want you to say that, like, we do have stuff in common. And I was like, honestly, we don't. And then she got angry and it turned into a yelling thing. So again, I realized, okay, so if I want to talk about something, I have to keep agreeing with what she says. Like, I'm just not allowed to hold this opinion. So I went back to how I was before, and I just stopped talking and agreed with everything. And then that also came to be an issue, because, like, oh, I feel like you're a robot. Like, why are you acting like this? But, like, the older I got, like, the more medicine she wanted me to go on, the more therapy I was in, the more stuff that I was in. And I'm like, as I was going through that stuff and taking those medications and being in therapy, I realized it's not me that's the problem. So I just realized, like, as a survival mechanism, just be amazing appeaser, do everything she wants, and eventually she'll be nice to you. But that never happened because the goalposts kept moving. As I went to college, the codependency ramped up even more. But because of my mother, she has a thing, like, she has a lot of health problems. She wanted to live vicariously through me. And I felt so much guilt for her. Like, oh, for a long time, like in my childhood, my sister and I had to, like, physically take care of her. And even after I came back from college, because she told me she was dying. That's another story. That video is still on my channel. Like, looking back on it, I was like, man, this woman lied. She was just doing whatever she could to get me back home, because, you know, we would be on the phone for hours every day while I was at college. And I didn't realize how abnormal it was until my friends started pointing it out. They're like, wow, you're on the phone with your mom a lot. And I'm like, am I? And then I realized, like, no one else is calling their parent almost every day, speaking to them for hours on end. And I was like, this really isn't normal. Like, I have friends who weren't from my high school, so everybody there was, like, pretty emotionally mature for what I was expecting. And I realized how unhealthy and unbalanced our relationship was. So as I started distancing myself and stopped calling every day, suddenly she was having health problems. And, you know, she did genuinely have a heart attack, but the extent of what was wrong with her, I felt, was exaggerated just to get me to leave the school. Like, she called and she wasn't able to talk because of whatever. So only my grandmother was able to talk. She was like, oh, your mother can't talk. She can barely move. She's dying. Da-da-da-da. Like, she's not able to speak. And I was like, those phone calls, like, it would leave me, like, at school for hours every day crying. Like, I had a massive depressive episode and had already had one every semester at that point. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like if I don't go take care of my mom, who will? And I'm like, why can't my sister do it? Like, why is it me? Like, I'm states away, I'm trying to get my education, whatever. So I go back, you know, I get everything sorted out, pay all this money to leave, go on a leave of absence, and pay somebody to drive me home. And someone was kind enough, like I had a couple mentors at the school where they were like, we will just cover this cost. And I was like, oh my gosh, thank you. And they helped me get enough money to get back home. And when I got home, she's just sitting on the couch, drinking some soda, meal out in front of her, giggling with my grandma, like everything's fine. I'm like, whoa, what happened? So I'm trying to piece it together. Like I'm moving my stuff back in. She had already let like one of the cousins who I hated live in my room, and it was condoms on the floor and stuff like that. And I'm like, you don't let me do any of like this stuff. Like I'm not able to have any relationships or do anything, but you're able to do. So it was just like really confusing for me. Like I was genuinely so confused. I came home, I looked around, and I'm like, you're perfectly fine. You're sitting on the couch having a gay old time, and I'm on the edge of a nervous breakdown thinking you're dying, you're on your last breath. So for the next couple of months, I took care of her, you know, making sure her wounds could heal, but I just realized the situation just didn't feel as serious and as great as they made it out to be. So that was what put the first inkling of doubt in my mind. And as I had been at college and talking to my mentors and stuff, they realized what things were. Like even during my first break, my friends, I would call them on Skype and we would like have chats during the break between the semesters. And they heard how my mom would talk to me when it was just us two, because she didn't know that I was on Skype. And they're like, is that Miss Michelle? And I'm like, yeah, that's her. And they're like, whoa, she's so different, because they would walk in on our phone calls all the time. My mom was excellent at code switching. She was very charismatic. So as soon as she would see or hear the sound of someone knocking on the door when I was in college, she'd go from screaming at me and yelling at me to being like a normal, healthy parent, like, oh, how are you? Did you eat? Da da da. So no one ever suspected a thing. So when I finally went back home and they heard it, they're like, whoa, that's not healthy. And you know, those people, they cared about me, and they kept like letting me know like this relationship wasn't healthy, and like I was an adult and I could leave. And I eventually did. Like I had a dog, her name's Susie. She's still alive, she's fine, but I could not bring her to Taiwan because at that time they were culling animals because of the risk of COVID. And I love that dog a lot, but when I had her, and this is before I moved out into the rooming house and before I was homeless. The reason I had to be homeless is my mom, she like let the door open and was screaming, scared my dog. My dog ran out into the street. She was banging on my door, trying to break down my door. She had threw stuff at me. Like it's like a 15-minute video call. Not a video call, but like a recording. And I had to use that because when I went to the homeless shelter the first time, this is before the Susie thing happened, I was just trying to see what I could do. And they're like, you're so well put together and articulate and well dressed, there's no way you're being abused. So I had to go back and get a recording. And then wait there for several more hours. I went back to where I had brought Susie after she ran out of the house, because I didn't say this before, but basically she ran out. I ran out after her, stressed out, you know, hyperventilating. There was a police car there. I waved down the police car, begged him, could he let me in? He let me sit in the back seat, and he was like, okay, what's wrong? And I was like, I'm sorry, I'm having like a distressed moment. I'm in an abusive situation. My dog just ran out the house. Can you help me? And he was kind enough. This is like one of the only positive interactions I've had with police. And he drove me around the corners a couple of times until we found Susie. He got out, opened the door. Susie jumped in the back door with me, and I had him drive me to my grandmother's house. After that is when I went and left her there. I didn't have her crate. I didn't have her food or anything. So I went to the corner store really quickly, grabbed some dog food, and her leash and her other things. I was like, okay, can you watch her for me? And that's when, you know, I gave her to my grandma. Okay, cut off. And my grandma, I don't think she thought I was serious about trying to move or leave or vacate the premises. She was like, sure, I'll wash shoes, guess whatever, da da da. So give me some money, give her some food. And I'm like, sure, here you go. And then I went back to the Department of Homing, whatever it was called, and I sat there for another 8 hours. And I was like, look, I have this recording. If you want to listen to it, this is the situation that I'm in at home. Like, I don't have any financial freedom. I don't have this. I don't have that. I don't have that. And they were like, okay, we're sorry. Like, you shouldn't have had to go back into a bad situation. We should have listened to you the first time. In that moment, I felt so heard and seen. I cried, and the lady was just like, okay, let's see what we can do for you. So they sent me up with a homeless shelter. You already know that video. If you want to see, you can see what that was. So like abusive, controlling, and like emotionally stunted parents are like the worst thing that can happen to you. Like I genuinely don't think that there's any benefits to being in that type of environment, and I'm a very strong advocate for having a chosen family and cutting off people who aren't good for you. Like once I left that situation, I was homeless for several months. If you want to watch that video, you can watch that video. I got used by some people at the homeless shelter. It was a bad situation. But eventually I found my own place, and then you saw the videos of that place. And eventually I was just like, okay, I can't do the America thing anymore, because if I'm in a city here, like, I just didn't feel like America had other cities that I could go to where the situation would be better, just because it's hard to be middle class, it's hard to succeed. And I was like, okay, I'll just move to a different country. And the first place I thought of was Ghana, and I was like, okay, let's see, how are the LGBT rights there? Yikes, okay, not there. Okay, where else? Europe, okay, I'm scared of Europe. Europe has a lot of issues. I was like, oh, let's go to Asia. And then I remembered, like, Taiwan, which I'd been interested in for a really long time. I was like, okay, they have legal gay marriage, they have really good protection rights. The treatment of foreigners is pretty good. The racism is there, but it's not as extreme as America. Let's go there. So it was just very freeing for me. Like 2 days before I left, actually, my sister came back to me because I had moved in with her briefly. I had completely moved out of the rooming house and moved in with her, and then moved back out within a month, because she was just like my mother, and she will also be on the phone with my mother all day, every day. And I'm like, see, the target has shifted. Like, since she doesn't have access to me, she's doing the same things as my sister. But when I tried to tell my sister how unhealthy it was, she just kept saying, oh, she's sick, like, you need to be more understanding, forgive her, like, she doesn't have that much time left, you need to do this, you need to do that. And I'm like, this is so unfair to us though, don't you think? But she was completely in the sauce. So I was like, okay, there's nothing I could do. And she kept saying, basically making me out to be evil for not wanting to see my mom. And I was like, okay. And I moved out because she would be on the phone with my mom and my grandma on a three-way call, making fun of me while I was in the apartment, calling me like a bum and a loser and stuff. And I'm like, why would I stay here? There's no point. I'll just go back to where I was. And then she was super angry. And at that point, I hadn't been in a relationship with my mom for 2 years. And even while I was trying to, reify things with my sister, she kept saying like, oh, just come with me and the baby and let's go see mom, or oh, just pick up him from inside her house, or this and this and this. And I was like, look, I've set this boundary with you so many times, I can't go around her, because even being in her presence is extremely triggering for me and certain things like that. And it was just tiring, like, oh my gosh, this keeps coming up, this keeps happening. Why do I keep having to put down my foot and say, this is my boundary, this is what I'm comfortable with, this is what I'm not comfortable with? Because it's like, you're not hearing me as if you're not choosing to hear me. If you respected me, you would not be doing this or putting me in this situation. And it was just extremely exhausting. So that's when I knew I had to cut things off with her. Cut off. What I realized was that our mother was intentionally pitting us against one another. This is not something that I realized until we ended up having that conversation as adults. And I was like, this was so intentional and well planned. So like, our relationship was doomed from the start, because my mother would say certain negative things about me to my face and then praise my sibling, and then do the same thing to my sibling. So we always felt like, oh, this one was higher than the other, even though she wasn't aware that she was clearly the favorite because of certain things. It was just like, okay. And I really tried to connect with her and, realize that, hey, it's not our fault that we didn't get along. Let's try and fix this now. But it just wasn't going to be successful, because in her mind, it's like, oh, I had it worse. So after that kerfuffle, like I said before, she showed up at my house 2 days before my flight to here. And she was like, hey, I understand, like, what I did before was a bit extreme, a bunch of apology words that weren't really genuine. And she was like, you were wrong too. And I was like, I didn't do anything, but okay. And then she was like, let's like try and work things out. And I was like, trying not to dismiss her feelings, but it's like, oh my gosh, most of the stuff that you went through, you intentionally did that to yourself. I didn't have that choice. So it was just like very exhausting trying to have that conversation with her. And I'm like, look, I'm sorry. And like 2 days, I'm actually leaving the country and I'm never coming back. And she was like, what? And I was like, yeah, so there's not really much of a relationship that we can have. Like, I've made up my mind, I'm leaving. And she looked very defeated. I was like, okay, I understand, and left. Since then, there's been outreach from her and my mom, with my mom just, guilt-tripping me about stuff that was going on within my grandma. And I was just like, okay, I'm finally free. Do I want to open this door, this wormhole that will lead to more issues, more drama, and me eventually being coerced to come back? Because that's what's happened when I was in college. Like, when I stopped calling as much, or not really answering calls, or saying I was focused on my studies, suddenly she was dying. And since I've been here, suddenly, oh, my grandma's dying. And I reached out to my grandma, and she does have cancer, which I thought my mom was lying about, but that was true. But that's all she said. So I'm like, okay, I'm assuming things aren't that bad. And it was just like, I don't want to get drawn back in here. So after that, I just blocked everybody. I'm like, this isn't worth it to me to keep getting dragged back down in like this very abusive dynamic where I'll never be able to grow. And I realized that. So I ended up stepping away from hurt as well. So this is my experience with this type of thing. I don't know if any other of you guys have had like strong situations with like codependency in your family or just belittlement in toxic relationships, but if you do, sound off. Like, I'm all for trauma dumping on people. It's part of being neurodivergent, but like what's the main neurodivergency line up? But it's like a lot of things that I feel like many people can relate to, and I'm hoping that the generational curses and the generational shackles can just be like removed with a lot of us. Like, me actively choosing not to have kids was like something that I knew from the time that I was 5, because I realized like something wasn't normal, and as I got older I realized how much not normal it was, and I was like, look, I've got all these issues here, and I already know that this trauma begets more trauma. I don't want to suggest someone else to that, but it's just not on the table for me right now. Maybe I'll think about it again in another 25 years, like if I've healed by then. But it's just, yeah, if you guys have anything in common or anything you want to relay or talk about, like, let's have discussion in the comments. And like, I'm always here to like go more in depth on this topic, but for now I'm gonna sign off and say